segue into our first topic, and that is talking about crunch. Now, we did a little piece about this I did like a little critical thought a few weeks ago, and we were going to talk about this as the story broke, but I wanted to wait for Rob to get back on because of the fact that he has experience both in the indie and AAA space, and I want to kind of get your thoughts on it. But for people who have somehow missed all the news surrounding Red Dead Redemption, the studio lead, Dan Houser, did an interview where he talked about how people were working 100-hour work weeks for like the last few months of development. And this kind of broke his story regarding the crunch culture at Rockstar and how people are encouraged to stay and work overtime on their games. And it's caused a lot more of an outcry regarding, again, this idea of the crunch culture, of forcing people to work, 40, 50-hour work weeks, or even more than that, to try and get a game done. And if you don't do it, then of course you're not passionate about a game, and so on and so on. But I'm going to turn things over to you, Rob. As someone who has done work both in the indie and AAA space, like, what are your thoughts on crunch and crunch culture?
Yeah, this is a tough one. First, I want to say that I hope you don't have to force someone to work a 40-hour work week. That seems ridiculous. It seems like a given. But it's such a weird thing to have to think about because having been in the industry for as long as I have, which is I think 16 years now. When you're younger, crunch is like something you almost at least for most of the people I worked with, crunch was something that just was whatever. You're young, you can do whatever you want, you can have those hours. Your life outside of work may not be as busy as it would be a couple of years down the road. And I know that creates a lot of other problems throughout, like it has a ripple effect. But when I was in my mid-20s, I basically, whatever. I could work an 80-hour work week, and it didn't bother me too much. And that was in QA, and we did do a lot of crunch in QA, especially given that we had a lot of games coming out during the year. So it was like we'd finish one and basically start another. There would be an off season of a few months, but getting that stuff out was a huge effort. And that's the same company I'm at now, but that was 16 years ago. They seem to have improved things quite a bit. Right now, crunch is basically, it might get up to 50 hours, and that's basically if you have not finished your work. Deadlines and whatever, you have to take it upon yourself to either finish it within the hours you're allotted, or if you have to, stay a few hours late on a given night. But I haven't seen anyone go beyond 50 at this office. It's the beyond that concerns me. Like I say, when you're a little on the older side, you might be married, have a family, and even when you're younger, that might be the case. In which case, that ripple effect comes into play, which is to say, when one person stays late and does like a 60-hour work week, if you want to move ahead in your career, you might feel pressured to do the same thing, which will negatively impact your extracurricular life. And that really does negatively impact things because I think a lot of companies will avoid the forced language. It shocks me that in this day and age, someone like Rockstar, because I work for the same umbrella company. Technically, Rockstar is like, they're Rockstar. They can do whatever they want. But I work under the Take-Two umbrella as well, and as part of 2K, and there's been no pressure. I just feel like companies kind of work the way they work, and I don't know. It's a tough thing. It definitely exists. It's not something that anyone, I feel like, likes. I don't think anyone looks forward to crunch. A lot of people feel like it is a necessary part and something that they just have to, just kind of go for, especially in a AAA game. But I can't get behind it. It's definitely not something that companies should strive for. They should strive for the opposite. An 8-hour work week is incredibly attractive to top talent. So for the sake of getting great programmers and stuff, and great workers, that's a good thing to shoot for. And sometimes it seems unavoidable, but there's other things to talk about there, like feature creep and whatnot. We can go in a million different directions, but I think to answer the question in a sentence, no, I'm not for it. I wish companies would figure out how to get around it. It's not an easy thing to figure out.
Yeah, and that's one of the big arguments when it comes about with regards to crunch, that we can see this in many different aspects when it comes to game development. And this is one of those points that I think a lot of independent developers talk about. I want to get your thoughts on this as well, Rob. That when you are like in a AAA company, you're dealing with dozens, if not hundreds, of employees. You have your schedule, your supposed schedule, planned out months, maybe even a year or two in advance, in terms of we have so and so milestones we need to hit, and we have a holiday 2020 release date, so this game must be out by then. But when you're an independent studio and it's just maybe you or 4 or 5 other people, and there is no set guidelines or set structure to follow, then it becomes another different story. Because I've heard from developers who will work on their game, an extra 5 to 10 hours a day. They may spend, an extra year in development. Again, the Stardew Valley developer, he spent, I think, 4.5 years working on Stardew Valley just to get that game done. And for them, it becomes more of this personal endeavor to try and get this game out. And there are people who will decry that practice, saying, oh, as an independent developer, you shouldn't crunch because now you're asserting that maybe other independent developers should crunch. So, like the idea that you're kind of spoiling it for everybody, I guess. So, I guess.
Go ahead, sorry.
So I was just going to say, like, what do you think about, like, from the independent side, when there's no, like, formal structure about the use of crunch?
I like Bray. That's a good comment. If it's a quality game, then I'm all for it. But for indie games, it's so bizarre. I mean, it's bizarre that anyone would talk about an indie developer as, crunching, and that's a bad thing, because when you're indie, it's just you. You might have a team of 2 or 3, but you basically bought into the fact that this is your project. It's your life. If your game doesn't sell well, then you've just kind of wasted a lot of time. So you've got to do what you need to do. As an indie developer, I can't imagine someone saying, "Hey, you're crunching. That's not fair." Sorry, I don't know what to say about that. That seems kind of ridiculous. I feel like for the AAA titles, crunching has a lot more nuance in its negative aspects than in the indie space. And yeah, like Draco, there's no standard to enforce as either. But when you're an indie developer, I mean, you have 100% of the choice. Yep. As a AAA, you might feel like you don't have the choice. It just happens. But when you're indie, yeah, what are you gonna do? I that one's a tough one. I don't see how you can eliminate crunch as an indie developer.
Yeah, and it's always been that weird thing about game industry. And going back to, I think Take-Two owns Rockstar now, right? Or they publish their games.
Yeah, I don't know exactly if Rockstar is fully under the umbrella. I feel like it's kind of it might be a Blizzard Activision kind of relationship. I don't know. I don't really study that aspect, but yes, I don't know if Take-Two is part of Rockstar or vice versa. I'm pretty sure it's the Take-Two is the larger. They are the ones who handle the publishing, like you say. And yes, they have the umbrella of companies. I certainly don't get checks from Rockstar. That's I get 2K is basically the one I worry about. But yeah, it's tough. It's tough. Dracon's comment about the top brass getting out with bags of money. I mean, there's certainly a lot of truth to that, and I feel like much higher ups don't necessarily have the visibility into the how the sausage is made aspect, and certainly in QA as I started, it's harder to see because no one seems to care about the grunts
Mm-hmm.
I am lucky enough to know that the QA that I work with, they have it set up to where there's enough employees that the coverage is there most of the time anyway, and that they're very diligent about overtime. Now, for programmers and stuff, that's a little harder because it is salary and hours aren't counted as strictly.
Mm-hmm.
So it is tough. It's a visibility problem. Individual managers of projects or even sub managers of projects on individual teams treat it differently, and some are much more aggressive than others about how it should be handled.
Mm-hmm. And another thing that came up with the Rockstar story, excuse me, is that they did a piece about this on Kotaku where they interview various employees. And Rockstar obviously is not just Rockstar North. They have, looks like, 8 different offices in 5 countries. So there's a lot of people under that one brand. And different places obviously have different rules for work, overtime, and stuff like that. And people have said that a lot of the employees, on average, worked about, from April to June, 45 and a half hours. From July through September, they worked 45.8 hours a week to get the game done. And again, they of course had to make a lot of the stuff anonymous. And it raises this point about, and I actually want to go back to what Mojo was saying as soon as I stopped coughing, about, as a consumer, and that is unfortunately the, I guess, I'm not sure that's nihilistic or the realist point of view, that for a lot of consumers, they don't care about, or they don't even know about how the sausage is getting made. And for them, like when they hear about Rockstar and new Red Dead Redemption, that's it. And we even see this in the game journalism side, again, with so many sites, praising Rockstar. I'm sure everybody has been lining up articles and fluff pieces about Red Dead Redemption 2 for like the last month and a half to get ready for this game release. Mm-hmm. So to have this news come out, I think kind of, put a lot of people in a very weird position. And that, I think, takes me to another big point I wanted to ask you about, Rob. And I want to also get the people watching live record on this one as well. That it raises that question about, at what point do we start doing more than just talking about this? Because there were people arguing, well, maybe we should boycott Red Dead Redemption. Maybe we should, take a point or two off of its review score for demanding crunch.
Yeah, it's a tough thing. Now, I would point at the movie industry as well as one of those places where overtime is disgusting a lot of the time, mm-hmm. like working 5 a.m. to 10 p.m. kind of things. Now, I feel like the immediate answer, and this is one that is a difficult one to bring up, and that's unionization. Mm-hmm. That is one of those things that hasn't come up in the games industry in terms of like being an actual thing. It's been talked about a lot, just like you say. And then when you said that the average is 45 hours to like 45 to almost 46, mm-hmm. that to me was, when I hear 45 hours, I do not think crunch at all. Mm-hmm. To me, 45 hours is, because I mean, having worked in, anyone who's worked in kind of an office type mm-hmm. scenario, that a lot of that is it's not 100% sit down, nose to the grindstone. It's a lot more lax than it sounds. So 45 mm-hmm. hours could basically just be, a 9-hour day that's mm-hmm. just kind of, you still have lunch. At least you should be taking a lunch, like a full lunch. And then, you get prepped at the beginning of the day, and then you work, and if work kind of takes you beyond that 8 hours cycle, then, that happens. And so 45 hours to me is just, hey, that sometimes happens when you get focused. There's no whistle that determines the end of the day. Most of these game companies that I've ever worked for have a very flexible schedule. Mm-hmm. So you can come in from like 7 a.m. to 10, 11 a.m. and then you work your 8 hours separate from everybody else, as long as there's that core window that everyone hits. That's and that kind of like balances out the crunch thing, I feel. because you're not feeling pressured to be there exactly 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. and beyond. If you're going to work a super long week, it's difficult. When I hear 45 hours, that doesn't make me flinch. When I hear 60 hours, that makes me cringe a little bit, because that is rough.
Yeah, and again, it's very hard to get accurate stories, because from the piece by Kotaku, they had some people saying, "Oh, I had a perfect experience working on Rockstar. They're great. Nobody did anything bad." And you have somebody else saying that they were working like 60 to 70 hour weeks. There's this feeling that if we didn't stay, that we would be fired. The cult-like mentality that can come about working at a major studio like Rockstar as well. And
yeah.
It can get very disturbing when we start hearing about things on that front. And from Mojo's point there, that's again one of those things that it goes back to this dichotomy between the journalistic and the game development side of things. That most of the games that we hear about, we don't really get these big exposés on, at least not when the game is released. So maybe in like a year to 2 years, there may be this damning thing that causes Rockstar a lot of trouble. But right now, every major game site, YouTuber, streamer, you name it, is playing, enjoying, and saying as many great things about Red Dead Redemption 2 as it can. And an article like Kotaku's little expose here is probably not doing much in terms of slowing things down. That's what a lot of people have argued, that yes, this is a horrible thing, but really at the end of the day, is this going to do anything bad to Rockstar? If people find out that the company's been crunching for the last 2 years, is that going to cut out, $5 million worth of profit to Red Dead Redemption 2? Probably not. I think it's safe to say at this point that we're going to probably get some very high numbers in terms of revenue for the game in the next few weeks or by the end of the month. And again, this is the issue that I think a lot of people have, especially when it comes to crunch, is that these games that do succeed in light of crunch, it comes down to, did that crunch actually hurt this game? If the game came out, it's a very positive one. We get, 9s and 10s from every major site, but people work an extra 10 to 15 hours a week, or maybe even more than that. Was it worth it in the end? And you'll hear people, like the people who are really passionate, saying, yes, I wanted to work that long because I wanted this to be the best damn product I could be, or it could be. But again, is it worth killing yourself or causing, as you said earlier, Rob, for a lot of people, they don't see like friends and family for a very long time. Is all that really worth it in the end if it causes problems like in a personal or health standpoint down the road?
Yeah, I want to make a couple of comments based on the comments that Mojo and Draken have made, and that's yes, crunch will add a little bit of sloppiness to that aspect of the project being made, but then yes, in this modern industry, patches coming out all the time after the launch. Excuse me. Speaking from a company or a project that is one a year. At NBA 2K. Now, 2K has, Visual Concepts, the company I work for, has two major projects, WWE and NBA 2K. Those have completely different teams that rarely touch each other. So basically, we all work on one project, and it's one every year. So this is like Call of Duty and that kind of thing, where you see an iteration every year or 2 years, and that schedule is very specific and will crunch for maybe 2 months. And then that is basically made up by vacation hours that are not taken against your standard vacation hours. So they do balance that out. They say, well, we know you've been working hard, just take this week off. Everyone take week X off, and it doesn't count against your vacation. So companies will balance it like that. And I'm fortunate enough to work for a company that does that. For like Rockstar in particular, I can't imagine that they'd have 2 years of crunch. I imagine, like most experience I have, crunch happens could be as much as a half year leading up to launch, especially a game as large as Red Dead Redemption 2. Like that game is ridiculous. I only read a little bit. Is it like a 60-hour playthrough? Is that the story? Like how long it is? Because if so, I mean, just the core being that long of a gameplay experience, knowing how much extra stuff they put in their game, I mean, that's an insane amount of work. And I can imagine a crunch would be about 6 months. I can't say how much they did. They actually did. But I can also imagine if it's anything like the NBA or WWE series, as soon as launch happens, everybody goes back to an 8-hour work or a 40-hour work week. And the patches just get done over people's regular days. And you'll see a lot of vacation follow the launch.
Yep.
But yeah, once the launch happens, crunch just diminishes like immediately, and certainly you'll have some people working a lot more hours than others. Usually the ones who are at the top, like the lead programmers or the lead producers and that kind of thing.
And like reading. Oh,
like
good. That's great. But I was reading a little bit more of the article while you were talking, Rob, about, again, like the experience with these different places really depends. Because, again, different offices obviously had different work to do on Red Dead Redemption 2. Like, there's a piece someone said that because they had to change the name of a city like halfway through development, like, again, it doesn't sound that big of a deal, but then they said, well, now you have to realize all the voice actors have to re-record their lines, all the text involving that city has to be changed, any art or textures that involve that name of that city had to be changed. And again, something as simple as changing 2 words can equal several dozen more hours of work, especially when we talk about a game like Red Dead Redemption 2. And that's always been kind of like Rockstar games, and this was kind of put them on the map from Grand Theft Auto 3, is that, as you said, these aren't simple games. They have, massive voice acting. They try to build their worlds as big as possible. They get all the licensed music and, talented people to work on them. And all that stuff isn't cheap. And it can easily, have they even released any numbers yet of how much Red Dead Redemption 2 costs to make?
Oh, I don't know. But yeah, for a game like that, and especially a change like that, which I had not heard of before, QA is a big that lands on QA directly. Like as soon as those changes are made, which is like you say, voice acting and any number of graphical assets. Yeah, that impacts everybody, and then QA has to find anything that got missed, which is going to be plentiful. But for a game as big as that, QA is going to be working on that a long time. And I feel like part of the deal that happens with crunch is you're going to be mostly finished with the game. 90% of the features are done, and then QA is going to find big items that impact an awful lot of the game. And for a game that big, QA is not going to find close to everything. I mean, the team you need to work on a game that is that vast and probably has a lot of difficulty ramp ups. I mean, certainly there's feature codes and stuff that allow you to cheat and do more thorough testing. But like a game like that, I can't even imagine how much effort goes into testing and fixing bugs.
Yep. And the rumor is that the game costs about $100 million for no, wait, that was Red Dead Redemption 1. So there hasn't even been any any reports yet about Red Dead Redemption 2. But according to things, like, they've been working on this game for 8 years now. So I'm going to assume it's going to be probably up there, maybe even more than that. But I want to go back to Draken's comment from a few minutes ago that game devs, it has to come from them, but this is a passion industry. Because that is always the sticking point when it comes to crunch and even just game development culture. That people don't get into the game industry as their backup job. This is not... So nobody gets up going, I hate making video games, but I'm forced to work at Nintendo, or I'm forced to work at Blizzard every day. And that passion has been a major part of what keeps people making these games. It's, as you said, it's what keeps someone sitting in their seat for an extra 5 to 10 hours to make sure that this game gets done. It's what keeps people working on a project for 5, 6 plus years because they want to see it get made. But while that passion is great, it's often, I'm sure you may want, I'm sure you'll agree with this, it's often used as a weapon, I think, against a lot of people, especially at major studios, saying, oh, well, if you don't want to work that long, maybe you don't really care about this. And then we'll just get somebody else. And we've seen in the past so many reports about a high churn or turnover rate, when after a project is done, a lot of people get out of there because they don't want to do it again. And it raises that question, and this is one thing that I don't think the game industry really has an answer to, is at what cost is it to make a game like Red Dead Redemption 2? Not from a monetary standpoint, but just from like a health and psychological standpoint.
Yeah, and that is one of the types of projects that I've never had to work on, and that is one that's been in development for as long as that. That is over half of my, well, just about half of my career, a game that takes 8 years to make. And I've the longest I've stayed at a company is 5 years, and the number of projects I work on at each company is pretty high. Just given the fact that I don't tend to work on the massive AAA titles, or AAA like titles like this one. I mean, I work on NBA 2K, and that's a AAA title, but it's iterative. It happens every year. And the league in particular, that's a separate thing altogether. But like working on a project that takes that long to make, I wish I could speak more to it as to what happens behind the scenes. Unfortunately, I just can't, because it's a whole other beast working on something that big and for that long. And yeah, the passion part of the industry does come into play, but like for projects like that, and I can imagine it like Blizzard and Nintendo and even Rockstar to that extent, like it does provide pressure. And I feel like the ripple effect I mentioned earlier, where one person works 60 hours, puts pressure on everyone around them to work 60 hours, and then it just so on and so on. It encapsulates the whole company. As soon as you speak out against crunch, you will get some dirty looks, which is to say, well, you don't know what you're talking about. You've not been in the business, or something like that. It's a truth. It's just something that happens, and I can imagine it gets to the point where people, like, your mentality goes. I remember working two different times, 40 straight days without a break, or longer than 8-hour days. Or granted, I got overtime, which was very nice, but you lose all sense of time. Like, I didn't know what day of the week it was. And by the end, you're just yelling at people, and you're just so frazzled that you can't think straight. So I can imagine that after a project like that, you just want to go. You just don't want to be anywhere near it again.
Yep. And again, that takes us back to this very big question as to at what cost is it to do a game like this? Because with something like Red Dead Redemption 2, again, Rockstar at this point has probably all the clout, probably up there with something like Blizzard or Valve in terms of what they can and can't do. So if Rockstar wanted to say, you know what, we want to take another year to finish Red Dead Redemption 2, I'm pretty sure Take-Two would say, okay. Like, are they really going to turn down Rockstar at that level? The same goes for Blizzard. But again, it raises that point, and this is something that we're never going to find out. If they didn't crunch and they took another year to make Red Dead Redemption 2, would it be a better game? Would it be a worse game? Again, we will never know the answer to that, and that's what makes these talks so hard. Because taking this back to the consumer for a second, again, consumers don't see what goes on at studios. They'll see, the little press pieces and those little interviews they do from a lot of major companies, but they're not seeing people work 60 to 80 hours a week on a game. They don't see people, pushing themselves for 5 to 8 years. And it's, again, one of those things that for Red Dead Redemption 2 in particular, there's already people who are attacking anyone who gives that game, less than a 9.5 out of 10. And again, it raises that point that, okay, you care about the employees, but if we say we're going to give this game a low review because of that issue, but now you're attacking us because of it. Because again, like, where does the consumer's loyalty lie? I think for a lot of people, it just lies with the game. They don't really care about the studio or the employees, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I feel like there's a little bit of a 50-50 thing there. And
Hmm.
I do feel like as a consumer, I like to reward companies that I feel do the right thing by spending my money or withholding. Now,
Hmm.
in terms of crunch hours, unless it's a huge like scandal like happened with EA all those years ago, um, I don't know how badly I feel because
Hmm.
again you mentioned 45 hours and I'm like shrug, that just
Hmm.
happens, that happens to me on a weekly basis when I worked an hour and it was like an hour and 20-minute drive to work and from work every day, so I'd be spending like 16 hours just in my commute plus working, and on a long day, and I didn't want to hit rush hour, so I would work extra to avoid rush hour. Um, so when someone says they worked a 9-hour day and that's too much, I kind of like, well, I don't know what to say, because again, that just happens sometimes. I don't clock in at 9 a.m. and clock out at 5 p.m. Just because I will finish the thing I'm working on and then I'll leave. So it's hard for me to talk to a 45-hour week, but if you're at 60, then you are going to be affecting people negatively, like really impacting their lives and their mentality.
Hmm.
So that if I heard that number, then that would make me raise a lot of red flags.
Hmm.
Like how many I would bring this to you is like you work 7 days a week, right?
Yeah.
And so do you have people coming up to you and saying, "Hey, that's too long"? Then you would
Hmm.
just say, "Well, I mean, it's what I got to do."
Yeah. And again, that's that issue between from the independent side versus a AAA company. When you're by yourself or you're a small team, there's nobody standing over you demanding that you work on this game. But in the other breath, if you don't work on this game, guess what? It's not going to get done. Like you can't just say, you know what, I'm not feeling up to. I'm going to take a 6 month, mental stress vacation. I'm sure the game will be fine while I'm gone. No, it's not. Guess what? You're going to leave for 6 months, and guess what? You're going to have an additional 6 months of work to do when you get back. And when it comes to the game industry, or when it comes to this kind of heavy game development, again, there are very few, I should say, exact sciences for how to build a video game. So what happens if you spend 2 years working on a game, you find that you had a major issue? Guess what? You need to spend another year trying to get it corrected. Very few. I don't think we know any developers who have had a perfect game development, that nothing went wrong, there are no bugs. I said the game was going to take 6 months, 3 days. It took 6 months, 3 days to come out. It doesn't happen. And I think this is one of the big things, because I've watched a lot of shows like for people who've a long time fans, I've watched a lot of like the shows that deal with like car restorations, Discovery Channel, Velocity. And these are people who they get a project, and guess what? They're working, 20 to 22-hour work days, when it gets down to like that crunch period. And everybody's tired, everybody's broken, but it comes down to that issue of if we say this has to be done by November 15th, then guess what? It's got to be out by November 15th, and nothing else matters. And for those people, they see again as, we have a project, we need to get it done, and nothing else really matters. But even then, again, as we've said, the human body can only take so much. It doesn't matter how passionate you are, if your body needs at least 7 to 8 hours of sleep and you're getting 1 to 2, you're in big trouble.
Yeah, it'll catch up. One we didn't talk about one different type of company.
Mm-hmm.
So you got indie and you got your I wouldn't call it AAA, but you got established. I
Mm-hmm.
would say there's startup, and I feel like they're the worst offenders of all of them. Because indie game, like you say, it really does come down to your passion. It comes down to you
Mm-hmm.
making a living, and you're the one who dictates your hours. So
Mm-hmm.
if you decide to skip a few weeks, like you say, then that work is just going to come back to haunt you after you get back. But for a startup, having worked for a couple, the mentality and the directives are definitely like, you are with us in the startup, we're going to ask for more than you're wanting to
Mm-hmm.
give necessarily. So you're right out of the gate. You're working 50, 60-hour weeks.
Mm-hmm.
You're just forcing yourself because the money only lasts so long at a startup if you don't succeed.
Mm-hmm.
So you do that. The pressure is there from the outset, and it does not go away. And if the company is not making money, like if they don't get in the black in the couple of years that they set out to do so, it's just going to continue until either the company folds or it makes it. And so startups are not for the weak of heart. And I've certainly gone through a couple, some that have failed, some that have succeeded, but none of which I stuck around for too long. I guess I did stick around 5 years at the last one, but like even then, after 5 years, nothing was stable, and they were still asking for the same amount of time. So you really gotta. I mean, you got it. It's a tough call, especially for startups.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, reading Mojo's comment.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, the unfinished products. I feel like that is the biggest blow. Like that's a great point, because if a project you work and you dedicate your blood, sweat, and tears to it, and it doesn't come out, that is like the hardest thing to deal with. It really is, especially for someone like me. And I mean, I like to really I put myself into the project, and that's like a no. You shouldn't do that because you become emotionally attached, and if it goes away, you're just messed up. So yeah, if the project gets done, there's something to be proud of there. If it doesn't, you're just like, duh, it just
what
was
was the whole point essentially?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And with Mojo's point there, again, it always goes back to that dichotomy of game journalist or consumer versus the actual game development. For a lot of people, they only see the finished product. And I'll give you a good example of this. I know I talked to you about the whole issue that's happening with Star Control right now, right, Rob? Regarding Paul and Fred and Stardock?
You might have.
About their basically being sued by Stardock for licensing over the Star Control brand.
Right, okay.
Yeah, so I don't want to go into that whole story here, but Stardock released their game I think it was last month, maybe 3 weeks ago. And there are people who do not cover anything that has to do with the Stardock Toys for Bob lawsuit that's going on right now. And there are people who are just playing this game going, oh yeah, I love this game, this is great. And again, they're not really caring about the actual ramifications to this brand that could be happening by the end of this year. And again, it raises that point as to it seems like most people only care when it directly impacts them. Like with Mojo's point there about unfinished products. I mean, how many times have we seen when a Kickstarter project doesn't come to fruition or it doesn't promise everything, that every gamer, YouTuber, you name it, goes on a massive rant about that game. Stonehearth, for instance, they spent 5 years working on the game, and they just completely ran out of steam at the end, so they said, we can't do this anymore. And you have people on YouTube writing videos about, oh, I hate this developer now, they lied to their consumers, and all that. But the game still came out, it just didn't come out with all the promises. But if it did come out and it was just a crappy game just because they got completely burnt out on it, it probably would have gotten less, I think, hatred than what it is now.
Yeah, and I'm actually curious. It's just Star Citizen. What do you think the hours are like there?
I don't know.
That's such a weird project.
Let's see what they're up to right now in terms of funding, so we can all be very, very shocked. Everybody, hold on to your hats if you have any. Let's see. I don't need to see this. Where is it? Did they turn it off? They couldn't have. Let's see. 2 million people are playing the game or have supported it. Oh wait, that's good. Maybe I should click on funding. I'm sure that's where it is. Let's see. And they are right at $198 million in terms of funding. At least that's what's happening right now. I'm sure they've received more based on people buying ships and whenever they do their big events too.
Yeah, it's just that particular project seems like a Winchester Mansion kind of project, and um, it's just something that just seems like it's never going to finish, and I just wonder how their work weeks are, as something that has no hard release date, and it's just kind of understood as an ongoing thing. I'm curious to know if they do pretty much strict 40-hour work weeks. That's an interesting thing to wind out, like to figure out, because all these games that we love, we find out that there are longer work weeks than expected, and then for these games that we all want to have, like it sounds like such a terrible thing, and we want to make fun of it, like Star Citizen. Are they just doing the normal thing? Are they making sure their employees are all good? That'd be interesting. I'd be interested in finding out that answer.
And one thing that we didn't. Oh yeah, I heard about that. The DOS message I think someone posted. Someone found a bit of code in a DOS game that was the person talking about how horrible the crunch has been. This was back in like 1983 or something like around there. So, and that's the thing, crunch has been a part of this industry since the very beginning. It's a part of any industry, I think, that is about, that passionate feel about trying to get a product done. One thing that we didn't talk about, and then I think this will be my final point, then I'll throw over to you, Rob, then we'll move on, is that we haven't spoken about, like, major studios outside of, like, United States and Europe. Of course, Japan has been called out for a lot of their kind of crunch culture, people like literally sleeping in their office, and putting a lot of pressure on people to get these products done. And I'm really curious to hear like what's going on with Nintendo, because again, Nintendo has been like one of the most secretive companies when it comes to like their culture and their kind of work ethic. So I wonder if we'll ever hear anything about them in terms of like how happy their employees are.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. It'd be very interesting, because it is definitely one of those companies where you can basically turn to someone and say, "Hey, there are thousands of people in this industry that would love to have the job that you have," and having that name of Nintendo, which is so different from any other company in this industry, just not only in terms of the hardware it pumps out, but the games it pumps out and the passion that goes with both of those things. Like you can't say that for Sony or Microsoft, except in maybe a couple of cases. But the dedication to the platform for Sony and Microsoft is not the same as the dedication to Nintendo. Yeah. So the pressure to want to keep that job just because is probably a lot higher.
Oh yeah. And as you said,
yes, probably true.
And a Nintendo themed casket will look like a pipe, like from Mario. But yeah, I think that's one other good point I actually want to mention as well. As you said, the name of the studio and that kind of cult-like mentality also carries weight to it. And we hear about this from a lot of major studios. Again, like with something like Rockstar there, that you're not working at, some independent developer. You're not working at a company that, is a fly-by-night operation. You are working at Rockstar, the guys who made Grand Theft Auto, one of the most well-received, critically acclaimed franchise of all time. The same thing with Blizzard. Like, when you work at these major studios or Valve, that the weight of that studio becomes a major factor, because you can work at other studios. You can be like a 5-person independent team. You can work at like a AA company, but you only have one chance to work at a Nintendo or a Blizzard or a Rockstar. And once you leave, chances are you're never going to have that same experience again, for better or worse. And again, I think that it becomes part of that passion. Because, I mean, how many people, outside of those who get caught, either being like nasty on social media or being caught doing something illegal, voluntarily decide to quit working at Blizzard? I mean, we rarely hear about it. And it's the same thing we see in game journalism. When you look at sites like IGN, PC Gamer, or Polygon, they don't post every day that we have openings for new people. Because who wants to give up a job like that? If you are actually getting paid by IGN to write a review for a game or get paid to go to E3 or PAX, are you really going to give that up for like a normal 9 to 5 job? Probably not. But again, that limitation becomes such a driving force for keeping people kind of pacified when it comes to these issues. Because again, we can sit here and complain about crunch till the cows come home, which is a perfect analogy for this with Red Dead Redemption 2. But at the end of the day, does that really matter? Is it going to, again, will it affect the review scores? Will it affect the amount of money it's earned? No. So unfortunately, it's one of those cases that unless something directly changes, it's just people blowing smoke, I think.
Yeah, and just to kind of tack onto that, and I think this can be my final thing, is the amount, the scale of the issue. Like, is 45 hours something to cry over? Or are you talking about someone, like you hear a story where a couple of employees collapse on the job because they've been working a 90-hour week. Like, those are the kinds of differences that I feel like would cause hits in the number of sales that happen. Like, oh, you worked a slightly longer week. Oh, well, cry me a river. But you hear about like sweatshop type scenarios where someone is forced to be at their computer and then they pass out because they haven't had lunch, or they haven't been given time for dinner, or they've been forced to stay up for 28 hours in a row. Like, that's or not even been forced but been allowed to. That's there's a very strong distinction there, is that it's not necessarily forced, it's just allowed to happen, and that in itself is probably a much larger problem. But like, yeah, the scale of it, the scope of it, if you hear something that's strong, if it ever happens, that will, I think, take a company down or at least impact the sales. But standard crunch, better or worse, will not probably cause people to bat an eye.
Until we actually get a union for the game industry, I think until we actually get a set precedent for how all this stuff works, like I said, I don't think it's going to go away either. And again, I think it comes back down to the consumer, I think, supports the game more than they support the company or the people working for it. And that is a topic, way too big for this section. That's like another hour and a half if we start talking about that. But like, again, I guess this is my final point. This is where we'll end this section on. If we find out tomorrow that, the new Smash Brothers games, or a new Smash Brother game, the employees are, being mistreated, it's horrible, everybody's tired and sick, how many Nintendo fans would not buy Smash Brothers Ultimate? How many people would say, in solidarity for the employees, I'm going to cancel my pre-order?
Yeah, that's a good question with an all too clear answer, I think.
Yeah, I know. And that's how I'll be cutting this video. So for people watching this recorded right now, you get that melancholy statement to end it on. Right. But